Paranormal in Pennsylvania may discuss topics such as suicide, murder, and other potentially upsetting things. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Paranormal in Pennsylvania,
where we discuss history and haunts, not weather maps.
Today's story takes us to the Hill-Physick House in Philadelphia. I'm Sarah.
And I'm David.
Let's get into it. So, as I said, today we're discussing the Hill-Physick House, and this is the home of the Doctor of Modern Surgery. And we went here on our Haunted Philadelphia Day, and a lot of it focused on the house, actually, and the social and architectural history of the house. I did expect more of it to be focused on the surgical history, but they did have one room about the surgery.
Yeah, I do agree. You would expect it to be more about, the surgery and such. However, he did live a very interesting life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Especially with the company he kept.
Yeah. So the house is currently a museum, but it was bought in 1786 by Henry Hill. He was a Revolutionary War colonel and became rich by importing Madeira. Dr. Physick inherited the house in 1815 from his sister. So that's where we get Hill-Physick, because there were two prominent people that owned it. Physick originally wanted to become a silversmith, but his father wanted him to become a surgeon. And that's where he became known as the father of modern surgery. An interesting tidbit that we got on the tour is because his grandfather was a silversmith and he was trained in silversmithing, he actually was able to make his own surgical tools, which helped him lead in this field and set some revolutionary techniques. In 1793, yellow fever swept through Philadelphia. It actually killed Hill in the house because, remember, he built it in 1786, so this is 7 years later that yellow fever is in Philadelphia, and then 22 years later is when Physick gets the house. But Hill became sick and died in the house.
Yeah, but do we want to tell them how he died, or his last few days? Surrounded by portraits of his loved ones, because they didn't know how this was spreading, and so they were quarantining him, and there was a point of no return. I forget if they say it was rounding the
second
corner.
Bend, I think they called it.
Second bend, yes. And once you hit your second bend, that probably means you are going to die.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Not. So he was not able to see any of his loved ones, and he died just looking at portraits.
Yeah, so the servants brought portraits in.
Quite sad.
Very sad. Physick himself stayed as a physician to be in Philadelphia, and he was one of the few that stayed there. He, of course, became infected himself, and he survived, but he nearly died from bloodletting, which was his own technique for treating yellow fever.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that while he created some surgical tools that are still around today, he was on the wrong side of medical knowledge and history.
Medical stuff, yeah.
On in this regard.
Yes, with bloodletting. Yeah, I mean, it was 1800, so a little different. Interesting about the social history is Dr. Physick's wife, Elizabeth, actually left him, and when she left him, she took her dowry back, which was absolutely scandalous for the time period. And he was so embarrassed that he forbade her from ever entering the house, and so she bought a house down the street so she could be close to her children. But she was never allowed to see them inside that house.
Right. He forbade her from coming in and tried to prevent her from seeing the children a lot. Their marriage was also kind of a strained one from the get-go, because she came from Quaker origins and she married a non-Quaker.
Mm-hmm.
So quite scandalous in of itself, I think.
Yeah, and that's why there was that rule that she was able to take the dowry back.
Essentially a prenup, no?
I think so, but I think it's something about the Quaker church.
And how they had it structured, access to money?
Yeah, because the tour guide was saying that the Quakers were really wealthy, and so they protected their money and they didn't want it to go outside of the faith.
Makes sense.
Lots of history there, clearly. Social history, medical history. As we know, that lends itself to a lot of ghosts. So the most common ghost story about this place is that Elizabeth herself haunts the gardens, not the interior of the house, because she's not allowed in there, but the gardens. And this is because she wanted to be close to her children, even in her afterlife. People have reported seeing a woman walking in the gardens, specifically near a tree that was chopped down near her death, and there's a photo of her in the house in a room that overlooks the gardens, so visitors have used that to cross-reference and confirm that the ghost is her. When she is seen, she's often accompanied by the sound of weeping, and the person that views the ghost is said to become overwhelmed with sadness. I think that's a cool haunting, but I did ask the caretaker about this haunting, and she said that it is likely not a true story, because the tree that is referred to in the story that was chopped down near her death is actually not on that property, but another one of Physick's properties.
Oh, okay.
So that part wouldn't make sense. I think it could make sense that she hangs out in the gardens to stay close to her children, but the tree part isn't real.
Yeah, okay, so part of it a fabrication, but does not necessarily mean she does not walk around.
Right.
And we've also discussed in other points, other recordings, podcasts, where a ghost is seen in two different locations as well.
Sure. Yeah. The caretaker also said that she has never had a paranormal experience there. And she doesn't believe that the ghosts really interact with the caretakers, but she did tell us some stories that guests have reported. So the first story that she told us was that two guests had an experience in the dining area where Dr. Physick sat for breakfast. And during the tour, she said that this was a really significant place because it's where Physick would review the surgeries for the day, mentally prepare himself, and the people that were there said they were standing there viewing this table and they felt an overwhelming sense that he was there actually sitting in the chair. And it turns out that it was the anniversary of his death on that day.
That is actually spooky.
Yeah.
But that's also one of the cool stories. That room was also very interesting with that chair. The decor in there had a lot of interesting themes.
Yeah.
Not going into it, but it was interesting. I could see how you might think it was like a little spooky.
Yeah. So the current caretakers live on site of this house, and they live in what used to be the servants' quarters. There have been reports of previous caretakers hearing dishes moving in the night and just sounds throughout the quarters in general. Sometimes the dishes are actively moved, but other times it seems to just be an auditory haunting. What's interesting is the kitchen has been fully modernized, which makes me wonder what the ghosts are thinking when they interact. Because we talk a lot about, ghosts disliking modern technology and causing it to drain, etc. But if these are ghosts from 1815, for example, a modern fridge and stove look crazy to them.
Oh, for sure. What I think is also interesting about that, though, is perhaps when they move, or the auditory is ghosts being like, this doesn't go here.
Yeah.
Like, what are these people doing?
Why are they putting it here? Yeah. I think it's interesting because it's almost as if they don't even care about the new technology. They're just so dedicated to their service that they're keeping serving even in their death. Just like, gotta do it.
Well, that's an interesting thought. Also kind of a somber one, sad.
Yeah, I guess.
It's like, that was their life.
Yeah, that's true. This place was actually featured on Ghost Hunters, and they said they went to investigate after many claimed that there are the restless spirits of people dissected by Physick for research. So Physick performed a lot of his research on stolen cadavers, and some of his history is controversial for that reason.
Was it that he was the one actually doing that? Or was it that was a practice? Like a black market practice that some people did? Because
he did not steal the cadavers, but it was regular practice for people to grave rob the cadavers and then sell them to the medical school.
Because I thought he had training abroad that was more comfortable, like in Europe, with opening up bodies for study.
I think it's both.
I could believe both. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Others report that prior to their visit, there were shadow figures throughout the house that they saw from the street walking in. Some say these are the spirits of the stolen cadavers. People also report items moving on their own. One interesting thing is people report looking out the front windows, and this is a ginormous house with a beautiful staircase that goes up to the front door. People report that if you look out the front windows to the steps, you will see people walk up through the front door and then disappear, as if they're coming up to the house. Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Ghost hunters captured disembodied voices throughout the house, and during filming, a cameraman was suddenly rammed by a cart that was seemingly self-propelled.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Do we have video clips? I mean, obviously, you look up the
Yeah,
Ghost
we can
Hunters
look it
episode,
up.
but-
We can watch it after this. Another interesting haunting, and this is just kind of like a fringe one that came up when I was looking into the area, is apparently a witch haunts this area, which is just Old City, Philadelphia, but specifically close to the Hill-Physick House. Apparently, the shrieks of this witch can be heard from within the Hill-Physick House and the gardens. And we didn't get to go to the gardens on the tour, which I was sad about because I wanted to find Elizabeth's ghost. But it would have also been interesting to see if we heard shrieking.
Yeah, my first question to that is, why a witch?
So,
Just because it's shrieking?
well, I couldn't find much else on this, other than there was a witch there that was ostracized from society and life, and so the idea is that she continues to haunt the area and punish the residents for not accepting her. And she's just screaming, I guess.
Okay. I mean, I'm far more comfortable with a vengeful spirit just screaming than doing anything else.
Right. And that's why I think it was interesting that there's not more information on this. I think, witch hauntings are really interesting because the idea of their souls never really dying, and maintaining power even in the afterlife, but there wasn't much on it, so.
I just find it very... yeah, so like with that backstory of a witch being ostracized, that does make more sense, but it is always interesting with witch hauntings that it's usually something of such power.
Right. So that's the hauntings and the history. Time to answer the question, would we go to this place of paranormal phenomenon? And I would go back. It's a stop on a ton of ghost tours. And there's also the tour that we took. I would go back if we went with family, because I think there's a lot of interesting information. I would love to go back for a ghost hunt, especially because a lot of the ghosts here sound like benign ghosts.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to take like family back, somebody that hasn't been there.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps they don't want to do the ghost tour, and I get that. But there is a lot of history. There's a lot of interesting cultural ties throughout many periods of history in that house.
Yeah.
Which is what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, there really is. And the room with the information on the procedures he used to do. As someone that works in clinical research, I was really interested in them. But I had to end up leaving the room because I felt like I was going to pass out looking at the images.
Some of the images are fairly graphic.
Yeah, and that was, when I was looking at hauntings, people said, oh, I was haunted and I got so dizzy on the tour. And it's like, no, you got dizzy on the tour because they're talking about bladder stone removal and showing you depictions of it and the tools.
Right.
I mean, not to discredit anyone's experience, but I do think that could be an alternate explanation other than ghosts, is just the content.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree that I think most people, they go and see those images and they're like, that's a lot. And
right.
Understandable.
Yeah. I think if you really look at them. So I would love to go back. Again, it's a beautiful mansion, just really cool piece of history. And I think a great example of not only a less discussed haunting, but a less discussed piece of history that is still so significant. Because
Right.
both Hill and Physick were significant.
Right. I mean, he laid down the groundwork for a lot of modern surgical tools.
Yeah.
Now, granted that, like, you know, a lot of them have been perfected. They're not like the actual true to form tool, but still, like, the first iteration, well done.
Right. So I would absolutely go back. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of Paranormal in Pennsylvania, where we discussed the Hill-Physick House in Philadelphia. Tune in next Thursday to see what hauntings and history we discuss next. Stay spooky.
Spooky!